James I, a king of scandals and intrigues. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you are new and leave a like on the video. Now let's start. King of Scotland at just 13 months. Apparently, the number 13 haunted him throughout his life. At 13 months, he was crowned King of Scotland, and at 13 he fell madly in love with the first important man of his life, more than 20 years older than him. James VI of Scotland and I of England was the one who succeeded Elizabeth I. The relative stability that he was able to give to his kingdom, however, was not reflected in his bed, where he never lacked a court of favorites who profoundly influenced his private life. Here is his story. A newborn on the throne of Scotland, James Charles Stuart was born on the 25th of June, 1566, in Edinburgh Castle, the son of Mary the One of Scotland and her second husband, Henry Stuart, known as Lord Darnley. From the very beginning, her life was anything but normal. Her parents' marriage was a disaster. Henry was obsessed with power, while Maria was the victim of constant gossip about infidelity. Tensions quickly boiled over, and just 8 months after James's birth, Lord Darnley was murdered in circumstances that remain mysterious. Many suspected Queen Mary herself was involved. In 1567, when James was just 13 months old, his mother was forced to abdicate. The child was proclaimed King James VI of Scotland. James's childhood. James was raised by a series of regents in an unstable context, marked by violent religious conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. The figure of his mother became marginal. Mary was sent to prison in England under the custody of Elizabeth I. Despite his complicated environment, James stood out for his precocious intelligence. From a young age, he showed great interest in theology and literature, writing books, treatises, and speeches on politics and religion. He was a brilliant student, obsessed with the idea of the divine right of kings. Stuart, his first favorite. But James's story is not only politics and study. In 1579, at the age of 13, he met Esme Stuart, a 37-year-old French nobleman and distant cousin. The connection between the two was immediate and quite scandalous for the time. Esme, sophisticated and Catholic, became James's favorite. It was said that the king hugged and kissed him in public. The behavior alarmed the Scottish nobles, not so much for the romantic aspect, but for the possible Catholic influence on the Protestant throne. The political pressure was such that Esme was forced to return to France, where she died shortly after, leaving James devastated. The young king wrote poems to express his grief for the loss of his beloved. Marriage to Anne of Denmark. Despite his obvious attraction to men, James married Anne of Denmark, aged 14 in 1589, while he was 23. It was a political marriage, but over time a relationship of respect and even affection developed. They had several children, including the future King Charles I. However, James's private life was always marked by his parallel relationships with young male courtiers. The rise to the throne of England. Upon the death of Elizabeth I without heirs in 1603, James, a direct descendant of the Tudors on his mother's side, also became King of England. Thus was born the Union of the Crowns, and James assumed the title of James I of England and the Sixth of Scotland. He moved his court to London, where he could finally be freer in his affections. There he began to surround himself with male favorites, to whom he bestowed titles, gifts, and power. One of the first was Robert Carr, whom he met in 1607. He made him Viscount Rochester in 1611. However, Carr fell from grace after being implicated in a murder involving his wife, Frances Howard. The scandal was such that James had to dismiss him. George Villiers, the great passion of his life. It was then that George Villiers entered the scene, in 1614. George arrived at court supported by his mother Mary Villiers, an ambitious woman who saw in him a means to rise socially. Young, handsome, and charming, he completely conquered James. The king nicknamed him Steenie, short for Stephen, because, in his opinion, George resembled Saint Stephen in a painting he adored. Villiers' rise was meteoric. In a few years, he went from knight to Duke of Buckingham. James wrote him passionate letters. He showered him with gifts and publicly displayed him as his favorite, even declaring, "Christ had his John, and I have my George." Many nobles were outraged, not only by the nature of the relationship, but also by the growing corruption. George was using his power to enrich himself and place his allies in key positions. In 1614, Queen Anne died at the age of 34. Although their marriage was initially a political one, James had become emotionally attached to her over time. Her death hit him hard, ushering in a period of deep sadness and isolation. From that point on, the relationship with George Villiers became even more important. George took on a central role at court, and James became increasingly dependent on him, both emotionally and politically. The relationship between James and George was unique, but also marked by the ups and downs of politics. Villiers' meteoric rise aroused envy and resentment at court. Over time, George amassed so much power that many conspired against him. In 1628, he was assassinated by an army officer, John Felton, who was deeply outraged by the abuses and corruption that Villiers symbolized. His death was a devastating blow to James, who lost his beloved and political advisor. For the king, life was never the same again. James died on March 21, 1625, at the age of 58, after a long decline in health, also due to excess food and drink. Upon his death, his son Charles I ascended the throne. Although James had attempted to prudently manage the religious and political tensions of his time, his death left a void that was soon filled by new conflicts, particularly with Parliament and between the monarchy and the people. That's all for today, and what do you think of the scandalous life that James led? Let me know in the comments, and if you're new, subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Bye.